So we continuing our conversation about energy efficiency, continuing the track, and now going from general policy conversation into buildings and what we can do there. And I just wanted to start this with a slide from the policy toolkit, which is the buildings version. So the one I showed earlier was the generic one. This is the buildings version. And just to illustrate how it works, I just want to use an example from Australia. So if we look at the buildings energy efficiency work in commercial buildings there, it's based on a measurement technology, a measurement methodology, which is known as NEIGHBORS. And that's the National Buildings Energy Rating System. And what's interesting about this process then is the NEIGHBORS rating, and therefore the audits done for the NEIGHBORS rating underpin a whole range of different policies. And by designing it that way, a market is created for those energy auditors. And so it's worth people's while to get into this trade because of the policies that are then built upon it. So you have your basic rating system, which is, and you have to have a rating done when you sell or lease a building. So there's if it was just sale for commercial buildings, that wouldn't be that regular. But because it's on lease as well, it means that you have a policy or you have a measurement that comes into people's view often. So it's on the hoardings outside a building. It's on the internet adverts for the lease of the building. So the market gets familiar with this. And whilst you don't have to have a particular level when you do that rating, you're telling the potential owner or occupant of that building basically how much it's going to cost them to run it. So it's an information tool, but it's based on a regulated process. And then, so that gives you regulation and information part of the policy toolkit. Then, as some forms of incentive, the government, for example, who leases a lot of buildings, they don't own their own stock necessarily, they will only lease buildings of a certain rating. There's a green lease guide in Australia, which defines the relationship or the roles and responsibilities of the tenant and the landlord. And that's all based on the NEIGHBORS rating. And then there are sometimes incentive programs for retrofit or incentive programs from the private sector who only want to occupy high rating buildings. And all of these are built on that same infrastructure. So that I just wanted to use that as an explanation of how this policy package works. It's not individual separate bits of policy that are unrelated. It's actually built to drive an industry, which is why I think it's particularly successful. It's just one example of many. So with that, I will stop ranting about the policy package approach and turn to our speakers. We have a great lineup in this session. I'm going to introduce them one by one. They're going to come and do their presentations, and then we'll come up to the stage to answer some questions, have a bit of a discussion. So I'm going to start with Yong Kyu, please. So Yong Kyu is manager of the Zero Buildings Operations team of Korea's Energy Management Association. So thank you, Yong Kyu. Floor is yours. And the pointer is there.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Yoon Kyu-seo from Korea Energy Agency, and it's my honor to speak to Sergeant Madam Z here. And I've taken on the role manager for Zero Energy Building and Building Energy Code. So today I will briefly and impactfully explain Korea's building energy efficiency policy and zero energy building certification systems. My PPT can be broadly divided in two parts: the regional context in Korea and zero energy building certification system. So then let me start. As you know, Korea is the world's 8th largest energy consumer and low efficiency consumer, Overall, the country uses more than 1.7 times than OECD average, and the energy source unit is 33rd of 36 OECD countries, the lowest level. So, to achieve NDC goal and energy security, it is more important than ever because of a global energy crisis. Our government tried to improve energy efficiency in building sectors. As you know, and achieving national NDC and energy economy aspect, it is important to secure the energy performance of a building in the early stage due to the characteristics of a building that is maintained for at least 30 years once it is built. So Korean government is setting a roadmap for mandatory of zero energy buildings. This slide is a roadmap for the expansion of zero energy building in Korea. You can see that it starts from the public sector in 2020 and expand to private sector. And in the Korean government, public sector is taking the lead in obtaining zero energy building certification and creating best practice and the plan to expand the related market and are in the process of being implemented. After that, we believe that spreading it to the private sector will help spread effective zero energy buildings. So you may be wondering what a zero energy building is. The answer to the question of why zero energy building are discussed in the building energy efficiency session is in this chapter. The definition of the zero energy building is interpreted differently depending on the economic and social conditions of each country. But in Korea, zero energy buildings are defined in the Green Building Support Act. Uh, Zero energy building refers to a green building that minimizes the energy load required for building and minimizes energy consumption by utilizing renewable energy. In other words, it is not a building that consumes and produces a lot of energy. As you can see in the figure, the goal is to achieve zero energy with a small amount of energy production by minimizing the building energy consumptions. So what are the main technologies used in zero energy buildings? Basically, zero energy buildings are composed of passive technology and active technology and renewable energy technology. Reduce the energy load of building through passive technologies such as building insulation and window. Increase energy efficiency by installing high efficiency facilities such as LED lighting and heat exchangers within the building. And finally, the building through the active use of renewable energy within building. The purpose is to increase energy independence. If you look at the following figures, you can see the names of the main technologies that make up zero energy buildings. So, how are the core technologies of zero energy building reflected in buildings? Zero energy building can be created through the step-by-step energy integration design. At the design stage, which is the first stage of construction, past design is implemented to reduce the energy requirement of the building itself. After that, we conduct active design to install high efficiency facility to efficiently use the energy used in the building. Additionally, we install renewable energy facility that produce energy within the building itself and increase energy independence. Lastly, the building energy status is managed with the building energy management system. In order to receive zero energy building certification in Korea, three conditions are required. First, the building must be obtain energy efficiency rating system of 1 double plus or higher. The building energy efficiency rating certification is another certification system in Korea that evaluate the energy performance of buildings. It evaluates buildings' primary energy consumption for 5 major energy uses, including heating, cooling, water supplying, hot water supplying, and lighting and ventilation. It consists of total 10 grade, and the grade 1 double plus is second highest grade out of 10 grades. Second, the building's energy self-sufficiency rate must be achieved by more than 20% through the installation of renewable energy production facilities. The energy independence rate refers to the ratio of energy production produced by renewable energy in building to the energy consumption mentioned earlier. Lastly, a building energy management system or remote metering system should be the installed to installed. Yeah. So, how do we calculate the energy consumption to obtain zero energy building certification? As mentioned in previous slide, yeah, our building energy used for 5 major energy uses, including heating, cooling, hot water supply, lighting, and ventilation, is calculated by the floor area of buildings. So when calculating, different standards are applied to residential and non-residential buildings because of energy use patterns, them are different. This slide shows the system and legal basis of zero energy building certification system. But I think due to the presentation time, I will omit it. So far, we have talked about the zero energy building certification system being promoted in Korea to improve energy efficiency in building sectors. Buildings have a minimum lifespan 30 years or more, and applying methods to improve energy efficiency from the start of building design can have a significant greenhouse gas reduction effect. Although it was an in-depth presentation, we hope it will be of some help improving building energy efficiency and reducing greenhouse gases in Asia. That's the end of my presentation, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Young-Kyu, for introducing what is a very important subject to our conversation about how we achieve the doubling of improvement of energy efficiency. Buildings are going to play a hugely important part, but as you've demonstrated, once you start scraping below the surface, it becomes quite a complicated conversation. And it's really important, I think, to share in fora like this so that we, like speaking to our friend from Pakistan, we start to try and harmonize our thinking so that we don't have too many systems out there, so that we can share knowledge, we can upskill consultants, people who can support us all in our implementation. So it's important to have an open global conversation about this. So thank you very much for that. We're now going to go to Ramola from ADB, who is the Principal Urban Development Specialist here, and she's going to tell us about some of what ADB is doing in this area. She's first to tell me she's not an energy efficiency person, and that's why she's very welcome in our energy efficiency community.
Good afternoon. So thank you for inviting me here. And my claim to fame is that I know a bit about energy efficient buildings because way back 30 years back, I trained as an architect. But what really interests me is what can we do given that, this is a low hanging fruit. There's a lot that we can do. So what is ADB doing and how are we engaged in energy efficiency in buildings? We've been wanting to work in this area, but now there is a stronger interest and will, as well as championship from ADB management to try and move this forward. There are several areas where we are working, policy and strategy, looking at how we can start the policy dialogue with governments. There's very different stages of interest from our governments. There's kind of, areas where they are actually working to a very large extent and on their own, whereas there are other countries which are really in its nascent stage and want to understand what everyone else is doing. So I think we have to always kind of plan our offerings based on the country context and start working on that. So this includes looking at policy reform, institutional strengthening, discussions on green building standards and certification, because it's not just updating the building codes for energy efficiency, it's also about disaster risk management. We are looking at inclusive access and improving the overall quality. For example, I've worked in Central and West Asia for the last 9 years, and most of the building codes are from the Soviet times. So there's a real need to actually update these. So we want to kind of take a cross-sector approach for this and work on that. So knowledge sharing and capacity building becomes a very important part of what we do. We work on urban management partnerships or twinning, and we try to bring in the experiences from other countries to explain what is being done. From a technical assistance point of view, we've been conducting energy audits. We provide TA grants for project preparation. We also look at master planning. I was just talking earlier that, 10 years back, I was leading the Green Cities Initiative in Southeast Asia, where we put together a Green City Action Plan for Malacca, and that led to some energy efficiency in public buildings and others. So it need not be that, the focus starts from an energy perspective. It could start from an urban perspective. What can you do in cities? And how do you work across sectors? So master planning and investment frameworks for short, medium, and long-term actions are also something that can be done. We've been also working on design and innovation and financing, of course. So that becomes a real large chunk of what ADB does, is to try and leverage the sovereign financing with non-sovereign or with private sector, and seeing how we can bring in green climate finance. So that is where we've found some success. These are just some of the projects which we have been working on, and I think the Philippines energy efficiency project was first processed in 2009. It was approved in 2009. So there has been on and off work going on since 2009, 2010. Either it is through the urban sector, such as the Ulaanbaatar Green Affordable Housing, the Bhutan Green Affordable Housing, which was processed in 2019. We are also working in Uzbekistan, where we set up the mortgage refinancing company, which now is looking to develop a green toolkit for green mortgages, for enabling green mortgages. So that is kind of, at different levels where ADB is involved. Largely, this is coming through the housing sector, but increasingly, we want to also work with the governments in terms of public buildings. For example, in Azerbaijan, we are working on developing a building information modeling strategy and roadmap with the pilot, where we see, again, there might be a good opportunity for us to enter the market. This is a kind of sample of our non-sovereign projects. So there's been quite a few on safe and affordable housing. The Georgia M Square affordable housing was one which was quite interesting. Because I was simultaneously working on a program for livable cities, and we found this opportunity where a developer wanted to come in and take up a residential project with the Tbilisi City Hall. And these were incomplete residential developments. So we said, okay, we can come in, but then you have to look at the plus, which is energy efficiency. It's also about inclusive cities. So let's do an accessibility audit, let's do an energy audit, and that's how it kind of went. So this was one of the first transactions in Central and West Asia where we were able to bring in energy efficiency and accessibility. And then there were also something of interest was the social and green bonds for green housing in Thailand. This was the first sustainability bond. I think you might have also met some of our colleagues from the ASEAN Green Finance Hub. So if you have any other questions, they will also be around. I wanted to highlight one of the projects which is in Tamil Nadu. It's an inclusive, resilient, and sustainable housing for urban poor sector. This is there are several smaller cities where you can see that there are good samples. But this was where we kind of came in upstream, looked at master planning, looked at how site location will make a difference. What do you do in terms of a building prototype? How do you rebuild communities? Engage with the people right upstream to have a participatory planning approach, discuss each and every element of the building. And this kind of also created ownership. I mean, one important part of any housing development or any community building or neighborhood planning is that there needs to be a civic sense and ownership of what you're doing. So they do then understand what is the lifetime cost, and if they understand the life cycle cost of a building, they know that eventually it makes more sense for that bit of capital expenditure which needs to go in. So this was a very strong design element and innovation that came in. ADB has not really worked so far upstream before, so it's one of the really good initiatives for us on how we can replicate and scale up these kind of projects. So including looking at thermal comfort and what is the green cover, what might be green spaces. I know I have a very short time, so I'm going to run through these slides, but if they are available, I'm sure. So these were some of the modeling and simulation approaches that we took. And coming to financing, we have a very interesting product which is mobilizing capital markets for a climate responsive and inclusive Southeast Asia. So this is for bonds and green bonds. Our team is based in Thailand, in the Thailand resident mission, and works also with the ACGF here. So this here are some examples where we had issued the green bond in Cambodia and also this green bond in central Patana, which really kind of brought together some of the smart indicators. This went across from green building certification to establishing some key performance indicators and monitoring of these indicators. So lastly, 45 seconds. I'm trying to stick to the time. But we have really committed to moving forward with energy efficiency. So the senior management has established a 1ADB task force, which is jointly led by David and me. And this is really to build on the ongoing work, which I've very shortly showcased, but really trying to understand also how we can embed this thinking and mainstream energy efficiency in any sector that we are working in, whether it is urban, whether it is health and education, school buildings, hospitals. Where is the opportunity for us to start that dialogue and not really think of it as an energy sector issue, but something which we can have cross-sector. And so this 1ADB task force provides more technical leadership and expertise and intends to expand further across. So taking up a few pilots and trying to ensure we can replicate and scale. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Ramola. And you answered your own question about why you needed to be here today. One of the things about buildings energy efficiency, particularly if you think about it from the nose to tail of the planning, through to the design, through to the implementation, construction, the materials that are used, and then how the buildings are used, is this really diverse set of communities that you need to get together in order to get that right from an efficiency and an overall clean energy perspective. And that's something that I think we're only, maybe it's obvious, but we're only just discovering how important it is to bring those communities together. And lots of people are saying this, but cities are where the action's at, where they're at the front line of our response to climate change. And so having energy efficiency built in at every point of the way is hugely important, because if it isn't, retrofitting is a real pain. It's very expensive. In some cases, it's almost impossible. So thank you for that. Really great. Now we're going to dig in a bit deeper now, and Dina from the Asia Development Bank Institute is going to talk about some more detailed operations in residential buildings. Dina, over to you.
Thank you very much. So let me share you the study which we took from Central Asia, and it was funded by ADB, the survey, household survey. Okay. So it was the survey we did last year, and around 1,500 households were asked. And it took place what's called in Central Asia, it's called Fergana Valley. It's a small place, but highly populated. Territory covers parts of Uzbekistan, part of Kyrgyz Republic, and part of Tajikistan. So for more details, you can see this report published on Karak Institute website. So it was jointly with ADBI, Karak Institute, and ADB, funded by ADB. Yeah. So what we found, we asked these households, as I said, 1,500 households, what is your primary energy source for heating? So you know Central Asia is very, very cold place, and the heating is really needed for survival. And you can see that majority of households using coal and firewood, so dirty fuel. So that's why for Central Asia, this energy efficiency building is really, really important. Why? Because it's high reliance on dirty fuels, also old residential buildings, like Ramova just said, most buildings from Soviet time. I mean, the codes and standards from Soviet time. And also high energy consumption due to very long heating period. So I don't even say winter. It's not relevant to, like, we don't heat in winter only. So we have heating season, which starts from autumn till spring. So you cannot call winter. Winter and heating season is different. Yeah, so like I'm from north of Central Asia. We had like snow, we can have snow even sometimes occasionally, even in April and May. But in winter, when it's real winter, in my home, we have like -40 even, -40. Yeah, so, but this is Fergana Valley. For me, it's very warm place. But for you, of course, for Southeast Asia, it's cold. Yeah, okay. So then we could use, of course, national government household survey, but what they are lacking, what they only ask what actually you are doing right now. They don't ask their perception. What do you think? What you're aware of? So that's what we wanted, perception. So this survey is about perception. So what do you think about fossil fuel energy? Is it harmful to environment and your family's health? Yes or no? And you can see majority aware of environmental. So it's not the issue so much of awareness. So most of people already aware, especially Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, 80% already aware of environmental and health issues. So this is not so much an issue. In Uzbekistan, it's over 65, so could be more, of course. But what is, despite that we're aware, right? Then we asked, do you have a need in insulation, in your house insulation? And then if you see the need in insulation, do you plan or not? So you can see that window particularly, many households say that there is a need and they plan to insulate. But for example, roof and wall, they don't see the need in insulation, but mainly like windows, right, across the countries. And also the results very different across countries. You can see, so they are not identical, right? So when we talk about Central Asia, yeah, we need to understand that difference. So those who said, yes, we need to insulate, how many of them plan to insulate? You can see the difference between roof, wall, door, and window. So I found big difference, like insulation is one word, but insulating what is important. So many households think that door and window, they really plan to insulate, but roof and wall, no. Most of them don't plan to insulate. So mostly door and wall are popular to insulate. Then we ask, okay, so if you need to insulate, but you don't plan to insulate, so why? What is the reason for not insulating if you see you need it? So and then several reasons, yeah, expensive, not enough information how to do it, and not enough information about financing. So again, the reasons vary across roof, wall, and door and window. So for insulating door and window, it's mainly the cost issues, but for roof and wall, it's mainly information issue. So you can see insulation what, it's really important. Okay, so then based on this study, we developed energy saving behavior index, just so to see that this index across countries. And the index, so maximum is 9, but the mean is 6. So across, and I'll show you across countries. Just a second. Okay, so index includes not only about insulation, it includes about energy saving behavior. For example, 90% save energy and use energy saving bulbs. 70% know about harmful fossil fuel, and then 55% use fewer appliances, watch less TV, and also 23% use energy efficient appliances. And then, so this index we put across different groups. You can see this energy saving behavior index varies across countries. As I said, like, let's not think that all countries, Central Asia, are the same, right? You can see even these parts closely geographically located next to each other, they're still different. You can see index in Uzbekistan is much higher and a lot lower in Tajikistan. Also, index is much higher in cities. There is no difference between male and female, both same value. There is some differences across age and also income, of course. Yeah. So generally, we did some empirical results. So I didn't show you methodology, but I'll share some preliminary results. The research is not yet finished. So who are more likely to insulate house? Those, surprisingly, households plan to insulate house more those who use dirty fuel like coal and wood. So those households who use coal and wood for heating, they are more likely to plan to insulate. So this is interesting results. So not those who use clean fuel, but those who use dirty fuel, they are more willing to insulate, right? This is interesting. So if you have any suggestions, I'm happy to hear. Also, those who use older buildings are more likely to insulate. So maybe because their energy efficiency is lower, so maybe. So those who are older buildings more likely to insulate. And also those who have higher energy saving behavior index, they are more likely to insulate. So those people who are behaving more with like saving energy, they are more likely to insulate. And also interestingly, because many people now talk about gender, we just had session on gender, no difference on gender between male and female on house insulation. And also even education, many people say, right, because more educated, they should be more willing, but I couldn't see effect here from gender and education. So that's it from me. Looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina. And I think that's a very important dig into the whys and wherefores. So we've been generalising perhaps about what actions need to be taken, but it's always important to go in and find out exactly what the community that you want to work with. I mean, this came out in Rola's presentation too. What do they want? What are they going to respond to? Because we heard us earlier, both in the introduction to this session and this morning, a lack of demand for energy efficiency. So if we don't understand the needs of the people that we're trying to influence, or we will continue to have a lack of demand for energy efficiency if we don't understand those motivations. So now, Shivam, we're going to, because there's two names down here, Shivam and Manish. So Shivam's going to now talk to us about an approach for leveraging public sector energy efficiency in buildings in particular. Thank you. Take all my rubbish away.
Yes. So first of all, very good afternoon to everyone, all the distinguished speakers, all the participants. So we all are aware that we have lots of building energy codes, building energy efficiency policies worldwide by most of the nations. but getting them implemented and getting them followed is a real challenge we all are facing. So today I'm going to share our experience on leveraging public buildings for energy efficiency market transformation and how we were able to integrate these building energy codes into the portfolio of the public buildings. So we should first understand that what there is a need for the energy efficiency. So India has set a target to achieve net zero carbon emitter status by 2070. And building consumes around 33% of the current energy consumption, and it is going to increase, as you can see from the graph. So building is going to play a crucial role in this transformation. India being the third largest carbon emitter in the world and a home to the 18% of the world's population, building is going to play a crucial role in this transformation, and that's why we are discussing about the building. Now, why public building is important? Because public building can trigger market transformation by demonstrating code compliance. Like if government is developing a code, then it is the responsibility of a public building first to get it followed. So public building can demonstrate the code compliance, and if a public building can demonstrate, then obviously it will motivate the private players, the other public entities as well. Now, tender specification adopted by the public buildings are usually oftenly followed by the other private players as well. And bulk procurement by the public buildings can also enable the market transformation by the cost optimization as well as the quality enhancement. So under the ambit of USAID Maitri program and the SARE program, we have done work with a lot of public entities, but I'm going to share our experience working with the Indian Railways, Energy Efficiency Services Limited, and the Lucknow Development Authority, which is the City Development Authority. So Indian Railways is the public entity responsible for the transportation of freight as well as for passengers. Energy Efficiency Services Limited, it is the entity to facilitate energy efficiency projects and to work as the super ESCO in the country. And LDA, Lucknow Development Authority, is the City Development Authority in the state of Uttar Pradesh. So I'll start with railways. So railways has set a target to achieve net zero carbon by 2030. But this is going to be difficult, or I would say challenging, considering the nationwide spread of 9,000 stations and 8 billion annual passengers. So that's why the role of the energy efficiency is very, very important. So as far as the energy efficiency or the energy consumption of the building is concerned, the non-traction load consumes around 2,500 gigawatt hour annually, currently. By the building typologies such as offices, hospitals, training institutes, railway stations, and many more. So what we have done is that we developed our energy efficiency action plan, which has a potential of lifetime energy saving of around 6,000 gigawatt hour, and we have already achieved 70 gigawatt hour in the first year. So this is just a brief on the energy efficiency action plan and the policy adopted by the Indian Railways. We focuses on the three major milestones. First one is the new buildings, in which we are integrating nearly zero or net zero energy standard into the tender specifications. We also developed the checklist so that the code compliance can be verified and validated from various stages of tender evaluation to the post monitoring. Then the second one is the existing building. So we recommended and we mentioned in our policy that baseline audit should be conducted, benchmarking should be conducted, and ESCO contracting mechanism should be used for the implementation of audit findings. We also recommended that we will not go only with the star rated appliances, but the highly energy efficient appliances available in the market. And the last and the most important one I consider is the capacity building. Because if my managers, if my staff is aware, is involved, then yes, I will definitely see the change in the real ground. Because without their involvement, nothing is possible. So this is the benchmarking exercise that we have done for the Indian Railways. So you can clearly see that for the office building typology, we have benchmarked their energy performance index ranging from 12 to 34. The most of the offices lies in the range of 49 to 105. 77 is the median range. We also compared these benchmarks with the national benchmark published by the Government of India. So 65 is the benchmark published by Government of India. So if we are aiming towards a net zero, then a lot needs to be done. We have to bring these outliers into the nearly zero net zero category. Similarly, you can refer the bar charts for the hospital, railway station, and running rooms. So these are our achievements. I'll not spend more time on it. Just to, yes. So second entity is Energy Efficiency Services Limited. So this is serving the nation for more than a decade and doing retrofitting in center government buildings, state government buildings, and private buildings, and is able to conduct the retrofit around 11,000 buildings. So the funding was provided by World Bank, ADB, and KfW. So comprehensive energy assessment was done by ESL, and agreement on deemed savings model on a PMC model was signed between ESL and the clients. So you can see the basically the impact of the intervention ESL has done in the public buildings. So like there's a average reduction in the energy consumption of the public buildings from 10 to 25%, and even more than that in few of the cases. So these are again achievements of the program by ESL. Now this is the intervention in the Lucknow Development Authority. So under Prime Minister Affordable Housing Scheme, all the development authorities were allocated to develop the affordable housing scheme for the lower income groups. So there, the concept of the green and the energy efficient affordable housing had not been associated with the affordable housing. So what we have done is that we analyzed the basically integration of e-features into the affordable housing scheme, and we figured out that the impact of the costing was not that much huge. So we presented our findings to the authority officials, and they got convinced, and they integrated these features into the specification. So there is a short video on the e-features. So now to summarize that, how these intervention has resulted into the scaling up of the intervention in the public buildings. So the model of the Indian Railways, basically Indian Railways developed the model bid document for the investment grade energy audit, adopted the standard procurement model for the procurement of audit services as well as for the appliances. So these models are adopting or are being adopted by the other public entities like Ministry of Defense and the largest thermal power public utility in India. So this is translating into business opportunities for private players. Now for the ESL, like ESL has adopted the bulk procurement model and bring down the cost of the appliances and increase the quality. So this has resulted into the like energy efficient appliance become more efficient, more affordable, and more available. Lucknow Development Authority, like this is the first case in India which has integrated this EE features into the affordable housing scheme. So by seeing this achievement, by seeing this success, other housing societies and other private players are also integrated similar kind of features. Now, like the road to success is always not smooth. We also face challenges. So the first challenge is that energy efficiency is seen as the add-on feature, not as the integrated feature. The second is that currently the procurement of the appliances are basically focused on the lower cost, or basically the lesser cost of the appliances than the operational cost as well. So the third is that there's a like different building disciplines like electrical and civil working in different themes. So civil discipline is still consider that energy efficiency is the subject of matter for the electrical discipline. Now, the fourth is basically like public entity can't handle and can't hand over the operation and maintenance of a public building to a ESCO. The fifth is like if we have integrated e-features into the tenders, then finding contractors is becoming difficult. And the last is that with the change in the leadership, with the change in the teams, the pace of the program, the basically adoption scales hindered. So these are the key driving factors. Like I strongly believe that that the strong leadership at the topmost is the key driver. The second is the basically like if you want to convince the your upper management or the top leadership, we should propose the pilot implementation of the program or the pilot implementation of the technology, and with support our proposal with the cost benefit analysis. The third is again the institutional strengthening. Like the fourth one is that if we have a comprehensive policy in place, but if we don't have the reporting mechanism, monitoring mechanism, then things can derail. The fifth one is that we should mitigate the impact on the project budget. Like if we have integrated the e-features in the Lucknow Development Authority project, it resulted in the incremental cost of around 6 to 8%. But what we have done is that we have proposed that instead of 4 units on a floor, we can build 8 units on a floor so that the cost of the stairs can be optimized. And that's how we were able to bring down the project budget. And last, there's the successful case studies. Like we should publish our good works and we should share our good works with the other public entities so that things get can scale up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lots of important points coming out there. One of my favourites, though, is the affordable housing point, because sadly, we sometimes see governments actually pull back their standards, reduce their standards for affordable housing on the grounds of needing to get things done quickly, and because they say it's going to incur higher costs. And that is actually building in higher energy bills for the people in our societies who can least afford them. So it's absolutely wrong to go that way, and I'm very glad that you really pointed that out. And this is, a lot of what you said is about the power of government, both in that context to perhaps even have more stringent requirements in those contexts. Leading by example, of course, in terms of government buildings, and also using the government buying power with public procurement. So all very, very important points there. So we're going to have our last presentation, formal presentation of this session with Jette. We've got two, have we? I'm missing somebody on my list. Which way round should we do? Darina? Yeah, okay. Darina, let's go to you next. So Darina's from NREL and has been looking at residential buildings and scaling up our energy efficiency opportunities there. So sorry for missing you out.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Dorena Mann. I'm from the National Renewable Energy Lab, and I'm really happy to be here to talk a bit about the innovation and community engagement work that we've been doing at NREL. And just as a point of introduction, for those who don't know who we are, the National Renewable Energy Lab is part of the US Department of Energy's 17 national labs, and we're the only one that focuses solely on clean energy and renewable energy. And we've been working for many years with USAID in a partnership called the Advanced Energy Partnership for Asia, on bringing the lab capabilities, the research and the tools that we have to our partner countries to support the energy transition. And I know we are a few presentations in, so it's probably pretty obvious, but I do want to give a little context about why buildings are such a big part of the energy transition and the work that we do. In ASEAN, buildings account for about a quarter of all energy related CO2 emissions, and energy use. And this is only growing in Southeast Asia. As we can all feel it, Southeast Asia, it's getting hotter, it's getting more humid, and it's urbanizing. So that demand is going to continue to grow. According to IEA, the growth is projected to grow by 60% by 2030, which I reminded myself this morning is only a few years away, and 120% by 2040. And space cooling demand could quadruple between 2017 and 2040. So these are really significant numbers. And what does that mean for a research laboratory like ours? I think the way we approach it is that we know we need to continue to innovate and find new solutions and adaptive solutions to the growing challenges that we're seeing at the forefront. So in doing this work, we're really focusing on integrated, multifaceted solutions. And what do I mean by that? We're not just thinking about energy efficiency on its own. We're also thinking about issues such as climate resilience. How do the technologies and the operations that we're thinking about stand up against the impacts of climate change? And we are also thinking about things like how do buildings kind of fit into the broader energy portfolio and objectives of countries or cities that are thinking about these issues. So how does a building interact with the grid, for example? As Mel mentioned about the community engagement and has shown up in a few presentations, we're thinking about community engagement and how do we make sure that the solutions that we're bringing forward are tailored and can be localized. And thinking also about what are those economic benefits and how are they distributed? Are they equitably distributed? Finally, NREL does quite a lot of work. We're very data-driven. We develop a lot of tools. We're coming up with data sets, and we make those things publicly available. And our goal is to have those tools and that analysis support policymaking, support investment decisions, and support how projects should really come to life on the ground. So what is research? And I think I actually decided to add this slide because I think it's helpful to ground what research looks like in real life. And these are a couple of examples of our work in the HVAC space. And the goal of these collaborations, it's with Blue Frontier and Mojave, these are two startups that NREL has worked with, is really thinking about how the innovations we're doing at the research level gets to move towards commercialization. So for example, with Blue Frontier, we're looking at how indirect evaporative air conditioning, how using desiccant solutions, and how integrating electric heat pumps can go into a cooling system. And working with Blue Frontier, they came up with a system that is 50% more efficient in terms of energy use. We're able to see peak load reductions with the liquid desiccant storage system, and ultimately 80% reductions in CO2 emissions from this. So this is really important to know. Like, we're seeing these innovations and we're seeing them, new solutions come to life from the labs, right? So there's a lot of technologies, a lot of innovations coming from research, but we're also seeing it's not all getting implemented. Things aren't always coming to life in real life, not being applied. I think we saw some data from Dina, and we've heard other presentations. So what does that mean? Why? And I think the key point I want to point out here is that technology is not the failure. It is the how we're implementing it. It is who we're implementing it with, in partnership with, and the cultural context that often gets missed. And I think Mel was just commenting a couple of speakers ago about it feels really obvious, but it is still kind of an emerging space that's being done. And at NREL, we're trying to think about how that cultural context comes into play and how that should inform our work and how we work with our partners. We have something called the Applied Research for Communities in Extreme Environments, or the RC Center at NREL. This is a center located in Alaska, and this center works closely with communities and with tribes to co-create building technologies, right? And this starts from the point of technology development. We have a lot of research and we have a lot of the building blocks, but we know community involvement is important even from that very first stage of that technology development, because that's where we can incorporate things like traditional knowledge, and that's how we can start to evaluate where things like local materials could be used. Much like all of our work, we're focused on a mix of the energy efficiency components along with affordability, as well as a fit for the climate and lifestyle of the communities that we're working with. And underpinning all of this, we're thinking about workforce development. How can we incorporate skills and provide lasting economic benefits in the communities that we're working with? And I think thinking about this, it might feel a little bit ironic for me to choose a place and examples from a place that's about as far away from Asia Pacific as possible, geographically and like climatically. But fundamentally, I think the best practices around community engagement and what we've learned from working in Alaska are very applicable here. It's applicable in our more remote communities, applicable in a lot of the spaces that we're dealing with, and a lot of the communities that might be represented here today. I do want to take the last couple of minutes I have in my time to highlight this specific project, which I think is very cool, the Enuktitut Pass project. And this is where we've worked with a tribe in Alaska to co-create and end up with a final product, which I think reflects a lot of like the best practices that we've talked about so far. We worked closely with the community, doing repeated workshops and charrettes to figure out how we can combine traditional Inupiaq designs with modern energy efficient technologies, right? How do we marry these two? And the final product, we had very thick insulation, modern high efficiency insulation, but we combined that with sod roofs and earth berming as part of the design, which is something that was traditional to that community. What the end product was is we ended up with significant energy savings. I think it was something around 80% reduction in energy use. And this is significant for these remote communities. Their energy costs for these tribes in Alaska is 3 times the national average, right? So by being able to reduce by 80%, that's a huge energy burden that we're lifting. And there's an element of community empowerment that we're really proud of. It's enhancing local skills through construction training, as well as preserving some of the traditional elements from their culture. And then in terms of resilience, we're improving our adaptation to Arctic conditions while maintaining that cultural integrity. So at the end of the day, we think this is a really good demonstration of how you can effectively integrate modern technologies as well as being respectful of like cultural components. And again, this is just an example from Alaska. We are really excited to explore how we can continue this research in other spaces. And for example, Pacific Islands, where it is similarly difficult to get materials, there's still their energy burden, and how do we apply it there? So I am at time. I'm trying to be very respectful. I'm happy to have conversations with folks following this and to also be part of this panel to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorina, and particularly for continuing that conversation, I suppose, that thought process of how we have to engage with various parts of communities to make things happen. But you've taken that a step further because you're right at the research end of the, the how to, the what materials, what designs to use, not just which services would you like? So a very interesting extension to the conversation. So thanks for that. So now we are at, sorry about that, the last presentation of this formal part of the process, and we're going to hear from Jette about some experience in Vietnam. So thank you. The floor's yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Jette Finsen. I'm with DAI, and I'm going to talk about a USAID-funded project in Vietnam that DAI implemented. The project is a 4-year project. It just ended in May, 14 million to support the deployment of advanced distributed energy solutions for energy security and energy resilience. And there were 3 components as part of this project. And I'm going to focus on the part related to innovation and specifically how the project supported innovations for energy efficiency. There were there were other components, and it sort of goes back to what I've been hearing all day about systems. Cindy Lim was talking about whole of government and systems change. So in this project that we were also focused on strengthening the local enabling environment and unlocking capital. But this part that I'll talk about here is just innovation. And we were working in, the project was working in 2 cities in Vietnam, Da Nang and Ho Chi Minh City. And the reason why we selected these 2 cities was we were looking for cities that had large populations and large sort of selection of energy consumers, so there was good potential for replication, and also cities that were very engaged on clean energy and would be good champions for this work. The project had very good success rate. It took a while to get started because the project started right before COVID, and then we had to, get to know the city. So it took about a year to start up. But then once we made the connection and had sort of engaged stakeholders, it really took off, and there was great engagement. And it turned out that what we learned was that cities are really good sort of places to work on this, because they are sort of, citizens there are concerned, they're affected by the air pollution, they're affected by climate change, dense populations. So the governments are really oftentimes bought into looking for solutions to address and improve energy efficiency or address energy issues. And then, of course, the cities are controlled or sort of accountable for a lot of energy use. So it's a great place to experiment with what works. And then going to what Darina was talking about, it was all of the activities were co-created with the cities. We worked with local experts and local firms. And I think that really made a difference too on the uptake of technologies. So how did we work on innovation? We set up an innovation fund to sort of support innovative technologies. And the fund, so the idea behind it was to effectively double energy efficiency by 2030. We really need to scale, and we really need to attract private finance. But in order to attract capital, you need to show that solutions work. So if this project could somehow demonstrate that innovations in technologies or options for efficiency worked, then that would be easier to attract finance. And so the way we set up this fund was to use USAID support, some funding to sort of overcome a challenge. We provided technical support for the project or for the technologies. The innovators brought the equipment. We didn't actually fund equipment. And the way it was set up, we specified criteria for who could apply and sort of certain areas, and it made it open for everybody. So we had applications from a very broad selection, academia, private sector, buildings, etc. So we got a sort of wide selection, and if we had just gone out, we would not have thought of the ideas that folks came up with. And then these very specific criteria helped select the best technologies with potential for scale and energy efficiency. The funding supported sort of getting these technologies off the ground. And then one key element was we provided some funding, but we also provided a lot of technical support around it, because the sort of innovators, the technology developers, they know technology, but they don't necessarily know how to sell it, and they didn't have relationships with where to pilot it. So a lot of what we did was helping making the connections, making the case, sort of showing how you communicate the benefits. We facilitated meetings for people so that they would get interested in their technologies. So I'm going to show you 3 examples, or just quickly walk through it. One was high efficiency ceiling fans. the developer did some studies and found that there was very large potential for this technology. There's a potential to replace 2 to 3 million traditional fans per year. So if this technology could be demonstrated effectively, there would be significant potential. And the demonstration, we tested it in schools, in some school buildings in Ho Chi Minh City. We found significant energy savings. There were some challenges. The company is very interested in sort of scaling this and has looked at manufacturing capability in the areas around Ho Chi Minh City and other cities, but they simply cannot find, like there's not enough supply chain and skills to meet the 2 to 3 million target. They can make 20,000 a year. And then there's also the other barrier is the stiff competition from existing technologies or options that are already branded but don't meet these energy efficiency, high energy efficiency goals. And since there are no regulations that require improved energy efficiency, it's harder to make the case for these technologies. Another option was energy management system, piloting an energy management system. And in this case, we piloted in a office complex with different tenants. And in Vietnam, in these cities, there's already auditing, sort of experience with auditing, but not these energy management systems that you can, with smart metering, where you set it up and it measures and you can see in real time where you can develop improvements. This testing showed potential savings of at least 26%. We identify opportunities for savings, and there could be even more. But there were some challenges in how do you, because we are for those systems, they should be in bigger buildings and bigger complexes. Here there were tenants, so how do you encourage leadership and all these different tenants to engage and use the lessons learned? And then in order to scale this technology, it was a university that had developed it. They do need investment and more support in terms of how to scale the technology. And this is where, again, you need the regulatory framework to incentivize investment as well. So a barrier there. Last example was an app that was developed by a private developer so that you could, consumers could track and view the energy consumption for households. In a lot of other countries, this is standard business, but not in Vietnam. And this app was just like, it had just been developed, so part of our support was to help further develop the app and figure out how to better track data. This is where I'm not an app developer. There's apparently a lot of data issues that need to go into this. So working on that, and then also helping with awareness campaign for uptake of the app. And we had, so once, and then also the app could be used for paying bills. So we thought that would, and there would be prizes, so we thought that would be a good way of attracting engagement with the app and uptake of it. And there was some uptake, but there were some challenges too, because the developer, we had to partner with the EVN, the electricity company, so sort of working together and the data sharing and getting the systems to connect was a challenge. Then users were concerned about linking their contracts to the payment methods. We know that, I know that from the US too. We are very concerned about that. So all these things, and then it just takes a while to build up the awareness about it. So we reached about 1,000 users. I think with more time and more outreach, we could have expanded it, and it could also lead to real savings. But again, this is an area where you need more sort of the whole of system set up to support the use of the technology. So what are the lessons learned from this? David was asking this as we were preparing for this, sort of what are the lessons learned for in terms of piloting new technologies and what works and what doesn't. It's really important, sort of our understanding of what we heard from the developers is you really need the enabling frameworks, and there needs to be some incentives around these technologies that will support the uptake. So the enabling framework matters a lot. And what we did was we worked, it was actually very instructive because we would use the lessons from piloting these technologies to then in the other components work on policies or finance issues. So having a project that it shouldn't only focus on the piloting and demonstration. You need to, I think, to be successful, you need to also look at the wider, like how can you use the lessons to address the barriers to regulations? And then the hand-holding, because the technologies, the testing of the technologies, those folks don't know as well how to engage in the bigger infrastructure. So where the donors or can really engage is in that support around it and making the connections. And then to scale, in order to scale this is where you really need the financing, the enabling framework and incentives to scale financing. And going back to Davina's point, it's very important what we found to work locally and test these technologies locally, because each, like for the high efficient ceiling fans, they had to be designed for the different types of buildings. You can't just require them. So there's a lot of testing locally with local issues. So working, sort of pairing the piloting at the local level so you can create the incentives and regulatory support system locally is really important. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and another reminder about the importance of individuals, and the problem that brings us when we want to scale, because it's going to make that process much more difficult. If we have ideas about how to do things at scale, but then we have to do such intricate processes to make them work. We're going to have a short round of questions now, but we have to keep it short because we don't have very much time, and so I'd like to ask everybody to try and keep to a minute or so in their answers. That way we can cover a bit more ground. I'm going to ask the first round of questions because we've prepared them. But that's why I say a minute or so, and then we can take a few from the audience as well. But just from Yun Q, one of the there were several questions prepared, but I'd like to just go back to recommendations to other governments who want to benefit from the experience you've shared. What are your 3 top tips to other governments who want to follow your lead?
For Korean government, the top-down approach is quite effective, and it is more effective in public buildings. However, there are many issues that need to be addressed in order for private buildings and to become zero energy. To resolve these issues, the KEA in carrying out the various policy research and support projects, and these include professional manpower training and media promotion, fact-finding surveys, and technology funding support projects related to zero energy buildings.
Thank you. And thanks for keeping it short too. We'll come back if we have a bit more time at the end. Romola, you introduced the new task force that you and David co-lead. What do you think that tells? That's an internal conversation, of course. Could you say what you think that tells us in terms of collaboration more broadly? You know, how do we work together? How do we use lessons from these processes to work together more effectively to achieve our doubling ambitions?
Thank you. And no, it's an interesting question because this is exactly what our new operating model is about. ADB has just gone through a huge structural shift last year, and it's all about collaboration, new ways of working. It's about the climate shift. About solutions shift and private sector shift. So these four shifts are defining how we will deliver the ADB strategy 2030. And one good example of this is setting up the One ADB task force on energy efficiency in buildings. The whole point of why it's jointly led by David and me and a lot of other team members is because we bring this cross-sector collaboration and a platform to really brainstorm and discuss how do we actually go about initiating this. So there are various entry points if we start working with governments. And like I said, you know, every government is at a very different scale, a different level of understanding, different expectations, and we have to match that. So it's very difficult if we do not have this kind of a platform for open discussion, transparent ways of putting together integrated solutions. We won't be able to tackle this because there's several levels, right? You've spoken a little earlier about the lack of demand. And on the other hand, we also need to build a business case. So how do we actually match this lack of demand, building a business case, and then having champions? What is the level that we can start engaging with government to really convince them that this is a real quick win if you want to actually meet your NDCs, if you want to get climate financing targets, and how do we then move that into more mainstreaming and developing the incentive for even private sector to come in and start working. Thank you.
Do you think there's a prospect to expand that approach outside ADB amongst international partners as well? Is there an opportunity to do the same thing?
I think absolutely. I mean, there's a real need for donor harmonization on this as well. And this is just the start, but we do hope to coordinate. And we've been discussing also with IFC on EDGE and others. And wherever there is a scope, we would participate and coordinate. And we've been doing that across several, even in the Philippines or in Armenia, Georgia, and other places. One thing that I must say, though, is governments don't want to choose a particular type of certification. So when that comes up, it's really important to really understand what is the government looking at and then help them to establish their own policy and regulatory frameworks, which can then help with the enabling environment.
It goes back to collaboration on guidelines, on methodologies, but not the final decisions. So, yeah, understood. Dina, in terms of what you've seen in your project, what three lessons can you draw for policymakers from that project, do you think?
Thank you very much, Mel. Very good question. So what I found that awareness of households about environmental and health impact from fossil fuel already getting higher. So for example, in 2 countries, we're above 80%. So people watch TV, social media, they learn about the damaging effect of fossil fuel on their health and environment. So the awareness already there. But for insulating house, for roof and walls, people responded that lack of information. So I think providing more information, how to exactly do house insulation, especially walls and roofs, I think that will help households to do it because they show willingness and they want to do it. We're aware that it's needed and they want to do it. So I think they responded that lack of information. And if information provided, probably they'll do more insulation for their houses.
Thank you. And that relates to a conversation that we had earlier. There's a level of interest arising in parts of the world for energy efficiency that you couldn't have said existed 5 or 10 years ago. So Central and Eastern Europe, you're getting many more people interested. We're getting much more interest from producer countries than we ever had before. So just to say we tried something once and it didn't work is a bad excuse now. We have to go back and try again and be more creative with our approaches. Darina, you had some great examples of very specific conversations that needed to happen with communities. But as I said, I fear that kind of prevents us from scaling quickly. How do you marry the need to scale quickly and the need to consult locally?
I think it's a great question. I think,
And it wasn't a prepared one. It just
I know.
I
was
had
like,
to
"Oh."
ask it.
You're throwing me a lot of curveballs. I think that certainly, like as I mentioned in the presentation, this is a major problem. It's happening quickly. 2030 is just a few years away. 2040 is just 10 years down the road, right? So we do quite a lot of work with at all different levels to support scale. So as I mentioned earlier, with the tools that we have, the data analysis, and our support for government partners, for decision makers, and for investors, it's trying to help kind of lay some of that fundamental groundwork for making those decisions around energy efficiency, around kind of building codes, and having that be data-driven and informative. So we have projects like LA 100, where we've done quite a bit of modeling, and that kind of provides the basis for decision-making at the governmental level. And as I shared the Blue Frontier and Mojave, like some of our commercial partnerships, we're also working with private sector on kind of how do we bring kind of the research and the work that we're doing in the laboratories outside of the laboratories, because that's where change happens. So working with these private sector entities on kind of moving those developments forward, getting to the point where they have impact and they can get to commercial and they can get into the houses or in the buildings that we need. So the Blue Frontier example, I do want to flag, last year, that company received $20 million of investment from Breakthrough Energy, right? So it's come out of our lab, and now it's getting to the point where it could scale, it could get deployed. So I think those are some of the examples of where I'm seeing like there's multiple points of intervention where it is solvable, we have the technologies, and we can get it into the ground, but we would need to kind of do it at the policy level, at the investment level, and at the private sector level.
Thank you. So, sorry for the unexpected question, but like I said, I had to ask. Shivam,
Fights jet flag.
Shivam, you ended your presentation with some, a list of barriers and a list of drivers. One of the things we're talking about here in particular is how we fund efficiency at scale as well. So what do you think those lessons tell funders? How do they help them make investment decisions?
I think first of all, we need to identify that what are the gaps, and we should onboard the building expertise to identify the gaps, because the fund is a critical challenge, and energy efficiency is the basically is a can create the larger impact in the new buildings as well as in the existing building. But funding is the biggest challenge, even in the public buildings. So first of all, we have to identify that what are the gaps, and we have to identify that who are going to be the real implementers on the ground. Like we can't provide to a fund to a XYZ company. So we need to also know the interest of the body for which we are going to fund the pilot or fund the projects. And then there needs to be a monitoring mechanism as well, so that we can evaluate that yes, our fund is getting utilized in the correct manner, and yes, we are able and we will be able to get some output of.
Thank you. Insightful. And yet, it's same to you. what that process you described, which got into a lot of detail, which had to be very tailored in some respects. What does that tell us about how what we need to do next to scale?
So,
Oh,
scale.
so that was for
Oh.
Yeti.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you could do larger programs like this because these, the funding was 50,000, 100,000. So I think to scale, you need to set the cities would have to set some target. There were earlier presentations on procurement standards and all that. So you need to build some incentives and set some targets, and then around it design pilots or around it. But as if you can put a sort of neutral target in place and then let the market and then create the pilots around it, then what we found was that a lot of ideas are out there. There are a lot of technologies, a lot of research has been done. It's supporting that step from research to showing that it works and then commercialization. So, but I think you do need in the case of Vietnam, you need more standards and more stringent standards and sort of procurement guidance and certification.
Thank you. So that kind of applies across a lot of our conversations today. We can perhaps have time for maybe 2 questions from the floor. And you wanted to ask a question earlier, so would you like to go now? Yeah. Yeah, sure. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So one question about the fan replacement in Vietnam, the project that you did, and I was discussing this with my Indian colleague that, I mean, in India and Pakistan, both are going through the phase of fans replacement. And you mentioned that only the motor can be replaced, because we were discussing that there are millions and millions of fans, and replacing them will create a huge recycling issue. So, I mean, that's a very good example, if you can elaborate on that, especially on that, okay, the motor can be replaced, the rest of the fan can still be there, which reduces lots of wastage. And the second question is...
No, just one. Because there was a gentleman just here who wanted to ask a question. Sorry, but we have very little time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. And my question is, so there are so many things we discussed over here, but in my perspectives, as far as my country concerned, we have some specific issues where sometimes that might have not discussed yet. For example, so if you think about building code, so it's a voluntary. So it has to be a regulation. So otherwise people will not motivate to do anything. But when it becomes a regulation, so it's a law of the country. But then we have the binding, but there's another issue. The issue is like building code has not been sometimes produced considering the country-specific situations. Because I read about the story of the building codes. Most of the things are PhD candidates' research. So they are converting into the book chapters end of the day. So when it comes to the HSGC values, U values, K values, whatever, the country-specific values not being finalized and determined yet. So then the problem is, so what cost that we have to import it from? So for example, if you're going to do that, there are 3 things they can do. Either we have to go for a mandatory process, or maybe alternative process, or maybe for the performance. So then how we can perform and produce this my particular building material, or this my solution is complying to the code. So that challenge is there. So therefore, I think USAID or maybe ADB has to do country-specific solutions to bring them and get them on board to this whole process.
Thank you. So if I could go to Yeti just on the fan question, do you have a quick response?
Yeah, it's a good point. It actually wasn't, it wasn't something that we considered in the project. It was just a very interesting technology that, and it looked promising. So we scaled it, we tested it. But I would think to address it, when I was saying you need to also, to scale it, right, you need some incentives. Then you would build into the incentive program some way of saying if there's a way, you know, like how you want to incentivize the waste issue. So it's something to build into the guidance for when you're building the standards versus this, but it wasn't, it just wasn't something, that's not how we ended up with that technology. It just turned out to be useful.
So we need to end now, so I'm going to take the prerogative of giving an answer to the final question, even if it's not a definitive one, and that is, it's very dangerous to say that every single thing needs to be localized, because then you will make no progress. But there are, for building codes as an example, there are a finite number of climate zones in the world, and yes, you need codes that are suitable for those climate zones. And you need ones for countries that are just starting out and countries that are more ambitious. But that leads to a much smaller group of trajectories, requirements for materials and designs, than if you just say that every town or every province needs its own code, which I fear is too slow a process for the position we find ourselves in at the moment, where we need to do the doubling quickly. So I would like everybody, sorry for cutting this short, but people need to go, they've got other meetings. We are all invited to a reception that's sponsored by ADB very kindly in the staff hub, which is just around the corner. And with that, I'd just like you to help me thank our panel. And please network and continue to ask questions outside of this formal environment. Thank you very much.